Good morning, everybody. Well, what a week. The withdrawal agreement, uproar, resignations, and, of course, Theresa May in this very studio here in LBC giving her first reaction to it and taking your calls. So what have we learnt this week? Well, we've learnt that there's a draft text that's been agreed between the PM and the European Union. We've learnt that despite the resignations, Theresa May has vowed to fight on. We've learnt that Jeremy Corbyn believes he could get a better Brexit deal. We still have to find out whether 48 letters are in or not, and overnight we've heard that Zach Goldsmith and Bill Cash have added their names to the list, and Graham Brady, perhaps conveniently, wasn't in London on Friday, so we'll find out perhaps tomorrow on that. And over in Europe, quite big development as Angela Merkel for the first time stands up and says she wants a real, true European army. So a hell of a lot going on, and I'm joined this morning by prominent Remainer Alastair Campbell. We're going to try and make sense of it all. We're going to try and understand what actually happened this week. We're then going to attempt to predict what will happen over the next few weeks. We'll take your calls all the way through the hour, and you can ring up and, within reason, ask Alastair anything you want. Now, you can call us on 0345 6060 973. You can text to 84850. You can tweet using the hashtag Farage and LBC, at LBC, and of course Facebookers and Periscopers. You can watch us live and you can comment and ask questions on Facebook too. Alastair, good morning.
Hello.
Quite a week. Now, we've obviously, after all the drama, we've had both Jeremy Corbyn and Mrs May appearing with Sophie Ridge on Sky this morning. And let's just have a little listen to what both of the leaders have said this morning and see what our reaction to that is. Let's listen to Mrs May on Sky News saying what would happen if this deal gets voted down in Parliament.
There's a process that Parliament will go through. If were it the case that the deal was lost, then the government would come back with their proposals for what the next step was. But we're not at that point. We're at the point of a week's further to go in the negotiation, when we have that agreement with the European Union at the EU Council and bring it back to the House of Commons. What I'm saying is I think every member of Parliament will want to look at the deal, but they'll want to ask themselves, how can I make sure that we deliver Brexit? And how can I do it in a way that's good for my constituents? And remember, there are those in the House of Commons who just want to stop Brexit. I believe it is essential for people's trust in politics and trust in Parliament that we deliver on Brexit for people.
Now, I know you're a Labour man, but she didn't exactly sound to be fully in control there, did she, of it all?
No, what was interesting was that she seems to be saying, having said in Parliament the other day, this is basically it. Mm-hmm. And to be honest, this is it as far as the Europeans are concerned.
Oh, they're not going to renegotiate this,
no, and you know, they've had 2.5 years messing around with this and being played around by Johnson and Davis and the rest of it. So, and yet, because she's obviously still worried about some of her ministers walking, she's sort of pretending that she can. And she's talking about these negotiations in the coming week. But I think what's extraordinary about what's going on at the moment is that she's actually being pretty dishonest about the nature of this deal, because she wants people like you, who are passionate for Brexit, to pretend that this is Brexit because we are going to be leaving the European Union, when actually it doesn't deliver on the sort of things that you've been wanting. And she wants people like me to think, well, actually, she's doing her best to stay as close as possible to the European Union and to minimise the economic damage that I think is going to be done by leaving. And she's ended up with the worst of all worlds. And what I find dishonest about it is that, so for example, the one bit where she was really vulnerable, I thought, in the interview, I didn't think it was a very good interview, to be honest, either side, but I thought the one bit where she was vulnerable was talking about this thing about the Northern Irish backstop, where she can't bring herself to say what is true, which is that the UK has surrendered the right to decide when, if it happens, that ends.
I think you and I will agree on that.
I'm afraid there's quite a lot we agree on, and in relation to the nature of the deal, because it shouldn't satisfy anybody who's a kind of hardcore Brexiteer, and it shouldn't satisfy a Remainer. And what she's trying to do is basically say, well, you've got people like you over there sort of extreme on one side. She would say people like
hang
me...
on, I'm not gonna, hang on. When 17.4 million people vote for it, it's not extreme, is it?
No, I think that you are extreme.
No. I just want to be independent.
And the 17.4 million didn't all vote for your version of Brexit. So, but you've got you over there, and then she would say, this is her speaking now, you've got people like, me and the kind of, she said there are people there just who want to kind of thwart Brexit.
Which you're one of.
I am somebody who thinks this is a catastrophe for the country, and I believe that the Brexit now being offered is so far removed from what was promised in June 2016 that it should go back to the people. And I actually think, Nigel, Okay,
well, I'll tell you what, on that point,
yeah.
And actually, do you know what? As far as Mrs May's interview this morning is concerned, there isn't much more to say, really, is there? Because it wasn't very exciting. What about Jeremy Corbyn? Because he was on Sky News this morning, and he was asked this point about the second referendum, which I know you're incredibly passionate on having a second referendum, or as you call it, a people's vote. Let's just hear what Jeremy Corbyn had to say on that this morning.
It's an option for the future, but it's not an option for today, because if we put a referendum tomorrow, what's it going to be on? The government must go back and renegotiate and see what it comes back with, and Parliament must look at that time. To do anything else now would be to ignore the reality of the situation, is that this government has had all this time to negotiate and hasn't really achieved anything.
So it's an option for the future, is what the Labour leader's saying.
Which is warmer than he's normally been. But I think what's interesting about that is he's basically saying the government screwed it up and we could do a better job. Mm-hmm. Now, that may or may not be true, but we are the problem I think Labour has is that Theresa May has tried to square some circles, okay, and she can't square them. And nor would Labour be able to square them. We can't be in and out.
No, that's right.
And I think that's...
Of course.
So
either we're leaving or we're not, and that's absolutely right.
That's why I think... I mean, you presumably... I've heard you say, you presumably think that this deal that she's brought forward, I think you said, is worse than what we have.
In many ways it is, which is why it's going to fail in the Commons, in my view.
Okay, but if it's worse than what we have, and if... What she seems to be saying that... We're having to do this because the country voted for Brexit. But if even the most ardent Brexiteers, such as yourself, say this is worse than what we have, it begs the question, what is the point of leaving on this basis?
Well, we're not going to leave on this basis.
Right,
I think what's become clear to me, Alastair, is I don't know what you think, but I don't think there's a cat's chance in hell of this deal getting through Parliament.
I think it's unlikely, but I think we're in such mad times that I wouldn't take anything for granted. And I think the reason why I was disappointed in the interview, given that she's putting herself out there in this way, and we had all this stuff about her faith and the process and Graham Brady and letters and blah, blah, blah. The country has to be confronted with the reality of what this deal... It's not even a deal, by the way. This is the divorce agreement.
Yeah. When she says we're delivering on open borders, etc. It's not even in the document.
It's nonsense.
No, I know that, and again, I think on this document we agree. But when Corbyn says that a referendum is not for now, in a sense he's right, isn't he? Because we're 131 days away from leaving the treaty. All right, there isn't time to organise a referendum, is there?
There'd have to be an extension. And I believe there should be, because look, the other thing.
So you're saying that Article 50, the date we leave the European Union, should be suspended?
I think this process, if the country, look, what's absolutely clear about this is the country's not uniting, the cabinet's not uniting, Parliament's not uniting.
So we should suspend Article 50.
I believe that at some stage we will have to extend the process, because and you've got the Labour Party sort of sitting there saying, well, we want a general election. They're not going to get a general election. I think it's virtually impossible that this Parliament, particularly with the Fixed Term Parliament Act, is going to vote to have a general election. So there's a danger that in Labour pushing for that the whole time, we're going to run out of time. And this cliff edge, I know you think that's over dramatising, but the no deal Brexit, and let's be honest, no deal is a deal of sorts. It's just a very, very bad and dangerous deal. So I think
which is a different deal, isn't it?
The reason why I believe that this should go back to the people is because her deal, this agreement, she said, let's just wind back a little bit, and this is what just didn't get even covered in the interview. Theresa May has made a succession of dreadful strategic errors. I think she triggered Article 50 too soon. She had that ludicrous election where she lost the majority that David Cameron had won and therefore weakened her mandate. She triggered Article 50 without a plan. She went to the Salzburg summit without understanding where the other European leaders are going to be.
And was treated appallingly
She
by
may
them.
have been. She was.
I mean, they're not very nice people, are they?
Well, some are and some aren't. It's like Britain. Some of them are and some of them aren't. But,
Do you know,
but
I mean,
most
would you
of
not
them,
concede that when you've got unelected people like Barnier and Tusk,
But they're negotiators.
they've behaved pretty unpleasantly towards
I don't believe that. I think Tusk made a silly mistake with his stupid cake photo.
Yeah.
But apart from that, I think I said this the last time I was debating this with you. When we voted to leave, whether we like it or not, the European Union, minus the UK, becomes their own negotiating vested interest. They're negotiating for the best possible outcome for
From
them,
their perspective.
which includes getting a good agreement. But it can't be an agreement that, as it were, disadvantages them and benefits us disproportionately. And this whole have your cake and eat it. I mean, let's be honest, Nigel, the campaign was fought badly on both sides, but it was won, a lot of it, by lies.
No.
Yes, it was. The
Well,
negotiations...
I tell you what, Alastair.
Wait a minute. No, there were lies. The £350 million a week was a lie.
We will come to lies. We will come to lies in the hour, particularly about the European army and many other things.
The negotiations have been conducted on the have cake and eat it fantasy, and now the reality is hitting home. The reality is there's no way of doing this. You cannot stay with the benefits of the European Union whilst pulling yourself out. That's a fact.
If you think we have to suspend Article 50, which you clearly now do,
I think we have to find more time for the process because to get even an election, I think you have to do that.
Do you not understand how, in terms of democracy, not only in the referendum did people vote to leave, but 85% of electors voted for parties saying we're leaving the European Union.
Yeah, and I was one of them. I wasn't voting for that. I was voting to stop her getting a mandate.
Wouldn't that be a bit of a betrayal of democracy?
Well, I understand that argument, but I think I'll give you another definition, I think, of a betrayal of democracy, is where a majority of MPs elected by the people are going to vote for something that they actually deep down know to be wrong. So, for example, Nigel, if you were an MP now, could you vote for this deal?
God, no.
Exactly.
Wouldn't even dream of it.
Right, exactly.
No, absolutely
so
not.
I
would veto it. Alistair, how long should Article 50 be suspended for?
I believe that...
Come on, a year?
I don't
2
know.
years?
I don't know. And by the way, I hope you've seen the story today, because we're paying in $40 billion for nothing.
I know that.
We've now got to do an extra $10 billion a year for every delay.
And it could go on and be who knows what.
Exactly. So I think to get to a referendum, you have to have... I hope the deal is voted down. I make no bones about that, and I think you do as well.
Totally.
Right, but if it's voted down, Nigel, where does it go?
We leave.
No, you can't just leave.
Now, I think,
you
folks,
can't just leave without... you have to lead the process.
I think we leave on
What
March
does that
29th.
mean, though?
Well, we leave and we go to WTO rules, but there's a lot to do in a short space of time
Absolutely.
either way. Alastair Campbell
That
thinks
way,
Article
by the way,
50
we definitely have an Irish border. You know that. We have an Irish hard border.
Alastair Campbell believes needs to be suspended. If you want to ask Alastair about Article 50 and its suspension, 0345 6060 973. In a moment, we'll try and understand this deal a little bit more. You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's 16 minutes past 10. Joined by Alastair Campbell, and thus far in this hour, we've had a remarkable amount of agreement between us, because we both think that this deal, the withdrawal deal, is a pretty rotten deal and doesn't deliver on Brexit for anybody. Let's take a call. Let's go to David in Paddington. David, good morning.
Morning. Alastair, what you just said, that there would be a hard border in the Irish Sea, a border in the Irish Sea and obviously the World Trade Agreement. How do you think that anyone in this country considers your opinion to have any weight whatsoever when you're considered by millions to be a war criminal?
Sunday morning.
That's nice.
Well, there we are.
I imagine that the reason why I constantly could spend my life in a studio is because the whole world agrees that my opinion is of no worth. You can either have a serious debate about the issues, or you can come on and just spray your abuse around. But I'm sure there are lots of people with more intelligent points to make.
David, I tell you what, we're going to move on. I got a question for you. It's come through by text to Alastair. To what extent are we in this chaos because the electorate got it wrong? Asks Michael.
Well, look, I've said to you before, I do understand why people felt that they wanted to reject the status quo. As you know, I was against having the referendum in the first place because I think referendums are very, very dangerous things to have. I do think that Project Lies beat Project Fear.
Oh, we're coming to that, don't worry.
Okay, Project Lies beat Project Fear.
We're coming to that. 50 years of it.
I think that the populist agenda, which you were such a big part of, prevailed, and now what's happened is it's not that the government is trying to make sense of the decision, and I think the reason I was so disappointed with the Prime Minister this morning, I think this is one of those moments where our political leaders have to tell the truth to the country, and the truth is she cannot deliver all. She was talking about the national interest, she was talking about this great economy we're going to have. She knows that this deal agreement is going to damage the economy. She promised that the future arrangements were going to be worked out by the time this agreement came up. They're not there.
Why would this deal damage the economy when it changes nothing?
No, I think it does change things because I think.
Well, not in economic terms, it doesn't. Does
no,
it?
It does because I think what we're doing, we're withdrawing ourselves, and we're doing it in a way that I think is already signalling our decline. I was in Dublin yesterday, right, and I was at a rugby testimonial on the night before the game where Ireland had that amazing win.
Yeah.
But I was on the way to the airport, and the taxi driver. He says, you know that place over there? And he points out the window, and there's this massive sort of new buildings going up. He says, we're calling this the Brexit building site. And these are companies that are already leaving the UK, relocating. I think, and that's happening.
I would remind you, Alastair, that in the early 1990s, scores of British companies relocated to Dublin. Friends of mine went to Dublin.
And they got burnt.
Because corporation tax rates of 12.5% were rather attractive.
No, but listen.
So there are lots of reasons for companies moving around the place.
Let's be honest, Nigel. People are leaving the UK economy not just because of the uncertainty, which is real, but because they realise this signals our own choice of our own decline. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think that when you and I were talking a minute ago, and you agree with me that this is not Brexit.
Oh, absolutely.
You agree with me that it's a terrible agreement.
This is basically vassal state stuff.
Right.
And that is the problem with it.
In which case, you surely... Why wouldn't you actually say maybe the way to resolve this now is for your choice to go up against my choice? If you like, no Brexit, my side, no deal, your side, and let's see where the public come out on that.
We will in this hour get to predicting what happens if that vote
No, but what's
falls.
your view on that?
I'm going to tell you in a minute. Jamie from Nottingham is my next caller. Jamie, good morning.
Good morning. Question to Alastair. Would Alastair agree that the deal that Theresa May's putting on the table is worse than a WTO deal?
Okay.
No, probably not. But I do think that you see that there are two massive problems with her agreement. And let's be honest, this is not the deal, by the way. This is the divorce bill. This is what we're going to pay in, and it's some of the arrangements will then be made. And we leave. By the time we're out on this agreement to negotiate the future, we've lost all the levers. I mean, it's been a pretty weak, badly handled negotiation anyway, but we lose all the levers. So no, I think it may be marginally better, but it's not that much better, to be honest. And the point is, she keeps saying that this is the national interest. How can it be in the national interest for her to do something which, by her own admission, to be fair to her, I think she has tried her best, but she will not answer the direct question whether this is going to make the country richer or poorer, because she knows it's going to make us poorer.
We've actually lost more sovereignty with this deal than we currently have. Because at least under Lisbon, which I hated and we should have had a referendum on, but at least under Lisbon, we're able, under Article 50, to announce we're going to leave. What she signed us up to is a form of customs union that without their permission we can never leave. So I think we agree on that. Jamie, thank you for your call.
So we've lost control.
Even more.
Yeah,
even more.
Exactly. So how can anybody support
and that's why I'm against the deal. Jamie's point was interesting, though, because no deal is better than a bad deal was a phrase that I came up with a couple of weeks before the referendum itself. And Mrs May then started to parrot that, but without ever meaning it. What she's now saying is a bad deal is better than no deal.
And Liam Fox is staying the same.
I know he is.
So listen, what was Boris saying when you met him?
Oh, well, I didn't really meet him. We were in the same restaurant, but...
I see. It wasn't a secret dinner.
No. And Stanley Johnson, his dad, was sitting in that chair where you are 3 weeks ago. So I was in a restaurant on Thursday night. Boris was in the next room.
Oh, I see. So
it wasn't the great conspiracy that it's been painted out to be.
Sorry, my phone's going. What did you talk about? Are you on the same page with him?
it's very interesting because I just said how fascinating it was to see a father and son at dinner who've got such diametrically opposed views. Because
You're not
Stanley,
answering my question. What did you talk about with Boris?
I was with him 30 seconds, 60 seconds, something like that.
But is he going to vote against the deal? For sure.
Do you know what? I didn't ask him that, but I think if Boris was not to vote against the deal, I think his credibility would be shredded. So I'm pretty certain that he will.
It's not very shredded now.
That's a matter of... Now, I tell you what is interesting, Alastair, is that, and you mentioned this a few minutes ago, you talked about the status quo. That, we on the Brexit side wanted to bust the status quo, absolutely, and you on the Remain side wanted to defend the status quo, and yet...
No, but I'm not defend the status quo.
Yet,
I want to remain
but
and
I'll tell you what's really interesting. Let's just have a look at the kind of things that have been said in Brussels this week. This week's been a big week in Europe, and no one's noticed here because, obviously, of our own problems. You've had France's finance minister calling for the EU to become a powerful new empire to rival the US and China. His comments... he basically saying that Europe has to be strong enough to defend itself in every single way. Emmanuel Macron used the centenary of the armistice, I thought quite disgracefully, to make an overtly political speech about forming a new European army. And yet, when I look at the debates I've had with your side on this for a quarter of a century, take Nick Clegg in 2014 debating with me.
This is a dangerous fantasy. The idea that there's going to be a European Air Force, a European army, it is simply not true. The problem with people like Nigel Farage is they swing at windmills. They see conspiracies everywhere. I wouldn't be surprised if Nigel Farage soon tells us that the moon landing was a fake, that Barack Obama isn't American, that Elvis isn't dead. It is not going to happen.
So there we are. That was Nick Clegg on saying, no. There's no European army. The European Union is going to stay as it is. Take Antonio Tajani, the President of the European Parliament. This was him this week in Strasbourg.
European Parliament want more power.
More power.
On the budget, we want to increase the budget from 1.1 to 1.3. We want own resources. We need also a European foreign policy with an European defence. This is very important for us. This is very important for the future of the European Union.
So it's more money, it's more power, it's becoming a big global player in military terms, and just to sort of cap it all off, and I wasn't sure I'd ever hear this from a German Chancellor, but Angela Merkel was in Strasbourg in the European Parliament on Tuesday. This is what she said.
What we should do, and this is really important if we look at the developments of the past years, we have to work on a vision of one day creating a real, true European army.
You see, Alastair, right from the moment of the 1975 referendum, when my parents' generation were told, don't worry your little heads, this is just about trade, it won't impact on sovereignty at all, this is an economic club, it's not ever going to be a political union, all the way through to the day the European Constitution was launched. I was there, Giscard d'Estaing, saying with this document we become a global superpower. On the same day, the Europe Minister for Labour, Peter Hain, described it as a little tidying up exercise. And then we go on to one of the big debates in the referendum about what kind of European Union is this and where's it going. And your side gave us the impression nothing much is going to change. I was called a dangerous fantasist. And now we hear they want to expand. They want to get rid of veto on foreign policy.
Well, some do and some don't.
Hang on. You've got you've got the President of France, the Chancellor of Germany, the President of the European Commission. Every one of the 5 presidents is now saying there'll be no veto in future on foreign policy, and we're going to have a European army. Do you accept that actually what would have been more honest for 50 years is if your side of the debate told us it's going to be a United States of Europe?
Look, there's 2 things here. The first to say is I do believe that you could argue about the way that Macron phrased it and with Trump arriving and all that, but the point he was making is that the way the world is developing with these, China's going to be the dominant power of certainly the next few decades, India rising, Russia reasserting itself. America, frankly, with Trump, let's be frank about this, I know you might disagree, but a lot of people feeling that America will be less reliable in relation to European security, that there is an argument about the extent to which European foreign and defence policy continues to develop in the way that it is. And by the way, I know a lot of people in the military, as I'm sure you do, and I think that our defence chiefs are actually really, really worried about the damage that Brexit is going to do to our security because we pull ourselves out of European defence structures. I think they're more worried about NATO
and what may happen to that.
But nobody's saying we're undermining NATO in this.
No man can have two masters.
No, Nigel, this is where you're wrong. You can be part of different international organisations.
When Macron says that we have to have a European army to defend against our enemies, and he
didn't say that. He didn't say that.
Well, I can assure you, Mr. Verhofstadt did this week. Mr.
Verhofstadt is a total federalist. I'll give you that. Macron is not.
Do you think the USA could pose a threat to us?
No, I don't think he's saying they pose a threat in the same way as China. He was saying they're not as reliable. Angela Merkel, listen, Angela Merkel, her whole life, her whole politics, she has said that there are two fundamental tenets. She will never criticise. She's very, very pro-Israel for pretty obvious reasons, the history, and she's very, very pro-American. But even she has said, and listen, there's evidence for it, that America at the moment is not our most reliable ally.
I tell you what, Trump will continue to pay for the lion's share of NATO, provided we pay our 2%.
Yes, but you can't have it both ways, Nigel.
You're right. You can't.
No, wait a minute.
You can't have American support and not pay 2%.
No, exactly. So
why don't they all pay 2%?
And they will continue. I agree
and they're not doing
that.
it.
Listen,
they're not doing it.
They're not doing it. But as they understand that there is a greater responsibility on them to provide for their own defence, and they're doing that within the context of European politics, why should you criticise that if it means spending more on defence?
I was told no European army. Now they're telling us that there's going to be one.
No, some are.
You're listening to the Sunday edition of the Nigel Farage Show. It's now 10:33. We're late. Time for the news with Philip Chrysikos. A Comrade's opinion poll published this morning in the Sunday Mirror and the Sunday Express shows a little bit of a change in the last few days. Conservatives down 3, Labour unchanged, UKIP up 2. Interestingly, Labour now a 4-point lead. And actually, if you think about it, that field work was done just 24 hours after the announcement of this deal. I have a feeling amongst Conservative Leave voters, she is in a lot of trouble. Now, I've got Mark on Twitter, I've got Nick on text asking me about the 350 million a week. Mrs May responded to this with Nick Ferrari on Friday morning. Let's just have a listen.
We've set out that we'll be putting more money into the NHS over the next 5 years, and it will mean £394 million more a week going into our National Health Service. We believe that's important. And that's, the NHS is going to produce a 10-year plan so that we can really look to ensure that we're securing the future of the NHS, which is, an institution that is not only loved by everybody up and down the country, but really does fantastic work day in and day out.
Was Boris Johnson right to have stood by that bus 2 and a bit years ago?
Well, this is a commitment that the government is making now. Yes, we can get some money back from the European Union, but actually it's 394.
So he was right to stand by the bus.
It's 394 million that we will be putting into the NHS
per week.
Well, there you are, Boris. Boris was right then.
No,
I wish I'd supported him now because I wasn't part of that. I've missed out in every way on this. I really did miss the bus on this one.
You did. I mean, I'll tell you what. The idea that this is to do with Brexit, they've decided to put more money into the health service because the health service needs more money. The idea this is some kind of Brexit dividend.
390. That's marvellous, isn't it?
It's just another lie. The bus you should be watching, Nigel, and that Tory MPs should be watching, and Labour MPs, is the one from OFOC, Our Future, Our Choice, that is touring the country, going to see MPs and young people. One of the best things about this campaign has actually been that young people, I think, are getting more engaged in this, and they're out there saying to these MPs, if you really in your heart don't believe that this agreement is good for the country, you have to vote it down.
No,
so we're agreed again.
We're going to come to that.
You're still going to tell me what you
don't worry about that.
Good.
Don't worry about that. Not one little bit. We're going to Romford to speak to Catherine. Catherine, good morning to you.
Good morning to both of you.
Hi Catherine.
Right, fire your question into Alastair, please.
Okay, I would like to ask a question about the nature of the EU. So the French government said the other week that the EU is an empire. So I'd like to ask both of you, actually, is the EU a supranational entity or a kind of empire, or is it a friendly club?
Well, I don't. When you say the French government, I mean, a minister or a politician may have said something, but I think the European Union is a collection of sovereign nation states and working in a common interest according to certain common values. And the thing is that, we can always take the worst that people say and think the worst of people, but I think the European Union has been a force for good in the world. I think it's been a force for good for us. And what's really interesting about about people like Nigel and Jacob Rees-Mogg and Boris Johnson and their opposition to this agreement, as Nigel said earlier, they're saying it's giving us less sovereignty. Their argument up to the referendum...
Even less.
Exactly. You were saying we've surrendered all this sovereignty, but actually you're saying we're in danger of losing the sovereignty that we have. And so I think that one of the real tragedies of this whole debate is that we've had decades of sort of anti-European propaganda and the lies that are told in the newspapers that have sort of poisoned the well of debate. The European Union is not a perfect institution. It needs to reform itself, and I believe one of the tragedies is that we could be leading in that reform, instead of which we're pulling ourselves out.
Catherine, what do you make of that?
Well, my understanding is that in the European Parliament, the UK only has a 12% share of the vote. So that means that 88% of the votes could be taken against the UK. So I don't really understand how that makes the UK a fully sovereign
but so if that's the case, why are we? It's the European Parliament. I mean, every seat. You might as well say, if you're English, well, why should Scotland have seats? So it's the European Parliament, and the point is, I mean, I don't know if you saw yesterday Nadine Dorries. I mean, honestly, one of her complaints about this deal was just, we're not going to have any MEPs after this agreement. Well, that was partly the point, wasn't it?
Well, it was. But, Catherine, let me tell you, I've been there 20 years nearly. It's a deeply unfriendly, centrist, authoritarian club. It's just vetoed a very reasonable budget from the Italians. It's removed voting rights from Hungary and Poland. It's run by a bunch of unelected old men.
No, it's not. It's run by
the European Commission are unelected.
They may be.
They're
appointed by the elected governments. They're not vile, Nigel. Some of them are bad, some of them are good.
Power without accountability. We're going to Northern Ireland, to Newry, to speak to Damien.
Good morning, Nigel. Good morning, Alastair.
Good morning.
Hiya.
I just want to put a dose of realism into the conversation this morning. Regardless whether it's Theresa May, Rees-Mogg, the Pizza Club from the Cabinet, or Jerry McCorbyn goes back to Brussels, there will be no renegotiation on the permanent backstop for Northern Ireland. And that's a reality that people need to get into their head.
I totally agree. Yes,
I do too.
And I think this is
once you've agreed something with them, Damien, they bank it.
No, it's not a question of them banking it.
They do.
They've been clear. They've been clear from the word go. People can criticise them. Michel Barnier, day one, he said that the thing we're going to sort out first of all are the reciprocal rights of British people living in the European Union and Europeans living here, the divorce bill, and ensuring there's no hard border on the island of Ireland. He stuck to that. While we, the British government, have changed plans. They had this red line, then it wasn't a red line. They had this Brexit secretary, then it was another one. I mean, we have been utterly shambolic when they have actually been pretty clear. And I think that, and they're still misleading people about the Irish thing. She wouldn't answer it this morning, would she? She would not answer this point about, is it true that the Europeans effectively now have a veto on this? And the answer to that is yes. And she should be honest about that.
Yeah. Damien, whether it's right or wrong, your point is absolutely valid. It really, really is.
But just my final issue is the DUP and others are trying to make a whole issue about this backstop. Every sector in Northern Ireland, from agriculture, manufacturing, business, is backing the backstop. It's our insurance policy, and that's going to be in place regardless of who's in government.
Well, the issue, Damien, is that of whether we need a hard border. And I think, when I listen to David Trimble and people who were very much involved with you guys with the agreement back in 1998. There are all sorts of ways. There is not going to be a hard border coming back, whatever happens.
But there
with
has
Brexit.
To be if we're on WTO. There has to be.
No, there does not. Because
there does, Nigel.
Do you know, I tell you something, all those containers coming into Southampton and Felixstowe right now, there isn't some little fella checking every one of those containers.
That may be the case.
We will come back to this.
Ireland is not
we will come back to this. You're listening to the Sunday edition of Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's 10:45. Early snapshots on the public opinion in terms of this withdrawal agreement show 49% totally opposed, that's according to Survation, and 27% totally support, with a lot of people not yet quite made their minds up on this, unsurprisingly. Let's go to Milan, who's calling from Chiswick. Good morning to you.
Morning both. So outside of lies and nonsense from the Leave campaign, Alastair, do you agree that the reason we're in this mess now is because Brexiteers cannot decide whether they want complete independence to make your own rules and import whatever goods, or frictionless trade with the EU? You cannot have both. That's pure fantasy.
Well, that's the square that can't be circled, and that's the one that she is still pretending that you can have, and you can't. And so I completely agree with you. And it's not just the Brexiteers who I think are being dishonest about this, but I think the government are as well. So all that stuff she came up with this morning about the national interest and, great schools, and we're going to have more money for this and more money for that, it's a total nonsense. So I completely agree with you, yeah.
Well, Milan, there we are. You've got total agreement on that. You might not get it from me, but you've got total agreement with Alastair. We're going to crack on. Could Jeremy Corbyn have made a better job of this?
Of the negotiations?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, in the end, it's I guess Keir Starmer would have led a Labour negotiating team. But I do feel, and I've felt right from the word go, that the Labour Party has been too much sort of kind of in the tide of this, rather than Sophie Ridge put the point to Jeremy Corbyn this morning. He's a leader. He's the leader of the opposition, and leadership means, I think, just the same as the government have not confronted the public with the truth about what needs to be done, nor has the Labour Party, because I understand why they're sitting there hoping there might be a general election, because it's hard to see this lot being re-elected. But ultimately, this is the biggest issue of our lives. It's the biggest issue of our lifetime, and I think all leaders have to stand up and what they say what they really think. Now, Jeremy's, you've known him for a long time. I've known him for a long time. He's not in the same place as I am on Europe. But ultimately, when I hear them talk about a jobs first Brexit, or, I don't think there is one. When I hear them say we'll renegotiate something better, what, in the 3 months that we've got left? I mean, how? So that's why I do think this at some stage has to go back to the people. Is this what you meant by Brexit? Is this what you meant by Brexit? In which case, both you and I would vote against it.
Let's just have a think about this, and let's try and make some predictions. Not easy, I know, but let's have a go. So we've got the big European summit next week in Brussels. Nothing's going to change. There is no way they're going to change their...
There'll be no basic renegotiation, for sure.
There could be a slight change in the wording of the political declaration.
And they'll try and help her. They'll try and help her.
But that's not legally binding anyway.
No.
All right? So I think we'll agree on that. No substantial changes. And Michael Gove and the other 4 cabinet ministers just whistling in the wind if they think between now and next Sunday there's going to be a big change.
And both Merkel has been very clear on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when she's clear, that usually is...
But let's say we come to a vote in the House of Commons and it's going to be, I don't know, first week December, second week December. I just can't see, looking at the arithmetic, any means by which she doesn't lose by between 40 and 60 votes. So let's assume right now it's put to the Commons, it's voted down.
Yeah.
What then, Alastair Campbell?
Well, as she said this morning, the government then has to come forward with a plan. I hope that what happens is at that point that the Labour Party, when it's clear that they're not going to grant them a general election, that Tory MPs are not going to vote for their own self-destruction, that the Labour Party comes behind the position that we've been pushing for some time now for a people's vote, that this goes back to the people. And then the question has to be Parliament and the Electoral Commission between them deciding what the question should be. If her deal is defeated, then if her agreement is defeated, then why would you put that on the ballot paper? Therefore, she maybe has to come forward with something else. I think Remain has to be on the ballot paper.
What about Leave?
Well, Leave, she would say what she's got is Leave. I agree.
No.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. So let me say this.
But Alastair, if we had a referendum, a wholly dishonest referendum, that said you accept Mrs May's form of servitude or you remain...
Yeah, but we're having a dishonest choice now. She's saying you either have her... Wait a minute.
You cannot have a referendum on that. I couldn't vote.
I
couldn't vote.
Wait a minute, no, Nigel. In which case, why aren't you arguing for a people's vote where the choice is no Brexit, no deal? What's wrong with that?
Well, I'm not arguing for a second referendum because we've had one.
No, I know, but why?
But let's keep the speculation going.
Yeah.
Let's go to James in Islington. James, good morning.
Good morning, gentlemen. I would like to ask Alastair, if there was a second referendum, what would the precise wording of his question be?
Well, and at this stage, I can't give you an answer to that. I can tell you what I would like it to be. I would like it to be Remain against some form of Leave that had been agreed by Parliament. But... that looks to me like it's not going to happen. So it may be, I know that Vernon Bognador, a constitutional expert, and Dominic Grieve, they've both set out a sort of different two-stage processes that you could do. And I agree with Nigel. I've got to just hear myself saying that again, but I agree with Nigel. I think
Get the smelling salts out,
I think
chaps,
it's difficult. I think it's difficult if the substantial body of opinion that does want to leave whatever the cost, whatever the consequence, but that could be taken off the table in Parliament. I don't know, but I think at some stage this is going to have to go back to the people, because let's be honest, Nigel, the country is not uniting around this at all.
No.
And that normally happens after a referendum.
No.
Normally the country will unite after a referendum.
Ever since Chequers, we've seen of the options available for our future, Chequers, stroke this deal, commanding between 10 and 15%.
Her agreement, the last polls I saw, it was polling below Donald Trump and Saudi Arabia. So, it's not very, very popular.
No.
And what's more, I think I do believe that the public, if they felt this was a real choice, and she let the cat out of the bag the other day, she did say, I don't think she meant to say it, she did say there were 3 possible outcomes. There's no deal, there's her deal, or there's no Brexit.
Yeah, which was disgraceful. To try and say, really, unless you have my deal, there's no Brexit.
We never heard that as well.
Before.
That is utterly disgraceful.
James, if we had a second referendum, I hope we won't. I would like the question to be, do you wish to be an independent country? Yes or no?
But that, Nigel, that is not a question. That is not a question.
No, it is because...
I can say yes to that.
Because...
I can say yes to that because we are an independent country.
Well, no, not if we're governed by the European Court. Not if our laws are made somewhere else. Not if we can't control our borders. Not if we can't catch our own fish. Come on.
But if it was you've said that this deal is worse than staying in.
Yep.
So if that is the choice, would you stay in?
No, I want to get rid of this deal. But I will tell you in a minute what I really want to see.
Okay.
What I really want to see.
Right.
Ian in Holborn.
You're sounding like Spice Girl.
Good morning. Morning, Ian.
Good morning, everybody. Look, it's clear to me, and I think many people, this deal's dead, and the government is dead in the sense that they're just a sort of zombie walking. The Tory party are in such disarray. They're never going to be able to pull it together in the next few months. So for me, general election or another vote is obviously the way forward. But what I'm curious about, want to know, is what people think, what Alastair thinks, whether if Labour were to win a general election, whether they could get it together to deliver something that's sensible, like the Norway deal.
Look, I'd like to think anybody could do better than these negotiations have gone, but I've said several times on this in the last hour that I think there are circles that can't be squared, and so you have to make that fundamental choice. The trade-off has always been sovereignty, but now we know that the Brexiteers admit that we actually have always had sovereignty. It's just that they would like more of it, or damage to trade and your economy. And so I would like the Labour Party to be much more full-throated in actually confronting the public with the truth about what this represents. And the thing is, here's the thing about a general election is about everything. It's about every single issue. I do think now, even though I'm not really in favour of referendums, I think the referendum having delivered the vote that it did in June 2016, I don't believe that can just be undone by an election. I think it has to be another referendum.
Well, Alastair, I'll tell you what I want. I want May gone. I want her gone.
Yeah, but then what is it?
What happens? No, it's very easy. I want a Brexiteer in charge.
It's not easy, Nigel. This is the problem. You've told the country for years it's easy. It's not easy.
I want a Brexiteer in charge. I want that Brexiteer to say, look, we're clearly wasting our time with these people. We're going to leave next March on a WTO deal. And we're going to get...
Right, so you want no deal?
We want no deal.
You want no deal?
I believe in those circumstances...
You want chaos, you want catastrophe.
I believe it. No.
Yeah,
as I say,
you want chaos.
Look at
you
China,
want Kent to be a lorry park.
And if...
You want the planes not to fly.
Oh, we've had plenty of lorry parks in Kent. As members of the EU, I can promise you. I want that. I believe the country would rally behind a leader that gave a clear vision of what they wanted.
They won't, though. It's fantasy, Nigel.
And if...
It's fantasy.
If the risk was of that...
So who is it? Is it Boris Johnson?
If the risk of that was Parliament
who is it?
overturning the EU Withdrawal Act...
Who's your Prime Minister?
...and forcing a second referendum...
Who's your Prime Minister?
That risk...
Who's your Prime Minister?
I'd rather take that risk
Who's your Prime
than accept
Minister?
this deal.
Who's your Prime Minister?
I could get someone off the street to do a better job.
Well,
to do a better job.
You've got to come from Parliament, Nigel.
Alastair, we're out of time.
OK.
We are out of time.